Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Hay, and it was my good fortune to meet Barbara Kraus earlier this year when I found that she has traveled extensively in the Arctic on an expedition ship. I thought to myself, I wonder if this lady would speak at an Enviro Cafe. And when I asked her if she could tie climate change into her presentation, and she emphatically said yes, I invited her to give tonight's presentation. So the topic of the effects of Arctic warming is especially pertinent as we've seen unseasonably cold temperatures at this time of year due to the effects of the warming of the Arctic on the jet stream. And now, although that isn't the focus of tonight's presentation, we may dive into that a little deeper in a future event. Before I introduce Barbara, I will give a land acknowledgement. So we respectfully acknowledge that the land, which we call Haliburton County, is the traditional territory of the Mishi, Sagig, and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, and is also within the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. The intent and spirit of the treaties that form the legal basis of Canada bind us to share the land for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. So we are recording this presentation, and a link to the recording will be sent to registrants in the next week or so. Please mute yourselves so as not to distract from the presentation. And if you plan on moving around, you might want to shut off your camera. If questions arise, please type them into the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and my husband Keith will take care of the Q&A at the end of Barbara's presentation. And now I would like to introduce Barbara Kraus. Barbara is a resident of Haliburton County. And as I mentioned, she has traveled extensively in the Arctic, where she works as a language and botany interpreter aboard an expedition ship. And I caught a glimpse of Barbara's photos a little earlier, and I think you will be struck by the incredible beauty of the Arctic. And now I'm happy to hand the screen over to Barbara.
Thank you, Susan. So yes, that is indeed how we met, and I always enthusiastically share my experience of the Arctic because I do understand how privileged I am to be able to go there on a regular basis, and I know that that's not given to everyone. So thank you very much for having me this evening. I'm looking forward to this. I am not afraid of speaking to crowds. However, I'm a little bit afraid of speaking to computers. I have never done this before. So please bear with me, and I hope I will push all the right buttons. Thank you. Tungasugit, welcome. This is a hudlik, an Inuit soapstone lamp, and it is used today as part of the Inuit welcome ceremony. There are no Inuit here tonight, but on their behalf and on behalf of their land, I would like to welcome you here this evening. Thank you for coming. Canada, as we know, is a very big place, and you can check the song by the Arrogant Worms in case you have any doubts. 40% of our landmass is in the Great North, far away from our cities and population centers. Our newest territory, Nunavut, alone comprises 20% of our landmass, but has a population of only 38,000 people. That's the green part there at the top of the map. To illustrate, that's approximately the surface area of Western Europe, populated by the equivalent of one small town. Down here in the south, we talk a lot about the effects of climate change, and we point at industry, vehicles, home heating systems, and so on as the primary culprits. But we rarely talk about what we rarely talk about, however, is the way in which climate change affects regions that are not significantly a part of the cause and effect equation. I've been very fortunate to be able to travel to the Arctic many times over the past 20 years, and I have seen firsthand some of the changes that are creeping up on us. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the remainder of the world. and yet those changes can seem imperceptible in a vast and sparsely populated region that depends on ice for its livelihood. Tonight, I would like to take a look at how that ice impacts the ecosystems of the North and what exactly changes when temperatures rise. Before we get into it, a word of warning, there are some graphic scenes involving country food towards the end of the presentation. There are four primary types of ice in the Arctic. The ice that forms the ice sheets and caps and ice fields and the glaciers on the land, as well as the icebergs they produce. Secondly, the permafrost in the ground that partially melts each summer, providing water to the land. Thirdly, the sea ice that forms each year. And fourthly, multi-year ice, which is primarily the permanent sea ice cover on the polar ice cap. Together, all this ice forms an ecosystem that nourishes animals, humans, and plants. If we take a look at this map, the light green perimeter on the outside is the average minimum sea ice coverage between 1974 and the year 2000. The dark green line is the average minimum sea ice in 2012, which is now also a while ago. This drastic reduction in sea ice is not only continuing, but is accelerating due to something called the albedo effect, which is the surface's ability to reflect sunlight. A high albedo, such as for ice and snow, reflects energy and has a cooling effect, whereas a low albedo, such as for open water, absorbs energy and has a warming effect. This causes a critical climate feedback loop whereby ice melts, exposing more dark open water, which then accumulates more heat and causes more ice to melt. And around and round and around it goes. So as we look at these different types of ice, let's start with everybody's favorite symbol for a warming Arctic, the polar bear, and its dependence on sea ice. That black blob there in the middle is a seal. And I don't know if you can see the one there on the ice floe. These images were all taken in the summer. 20 years ago, we would routinely encounter sea ice in the course of every trip. Where there is ice, there are seals hauled out, and where there are seals, there are bears hunting them. It's their primary food source. Now, however, there's virtually no ice on the sea during the summer, and while the world is eyeing the potential for shipping lanes, polar bears are unable to hunt. The bears roam the land, hoping to come across a whale or a seal carcass. They will snack on berries when available and sleep a lot. A lot of these bears are waiting for the sea ice to form in the fall so they can hunt again. A bear cannot hunt a seal in open water, but it can ambush a seal hauled out on an ice floe or coming up for air at a breathing hole. The bears hunt in this manner all winter long. In the spring, they congregate on the ice when the seals are pupping and gorge themselves before the long summer fast sets in. This is also mating season, when the otherwise solitary bears come together. However, after successful mating, the blastocyst, which is an early embryonic cell mass, does not immediately implant in the female's uterus. They share a tactic with a number of other mammals called delayed implantation, which means that the females will carry the blastocyst all summer and through to the fall. At that time, their body condition will determine whether they will be able to survive the winter in a den, again not feeding for several months. For successful implantation to occur, females must gain at least 200 kilos from early spring to early fall, in other words, when there's ice on which to hunt seals, to provide them with an adequate layer of fat, i.e., energy reserves. The problem with rising temperatures is that the ice will melt sooner in the spring and form later in the fall, thus shortening the bear's hunting season more and more. When we talk about polar bear populations being in jeopardy, it's not because individual bears are starving. While this does occur, as it does in any wild species, the long-term problem is that the females will no longer be in good enough condition in the fall for the blastocyst to implant, and they will simply stop having cubs. Next, let's take a look at the glaciers. The Greenland ice sheet is an average of approximately 1.7 kilometers thick, and the ice caps in the Canadian Arctic vary from about 300 to 800 meters in thickness. These masses of ice have glaciers or ice tongues that extend to the sea and calve icebergs when the pressure of the moving glacier pushes the terminal point into the water. These are called tidewater glaciers, and the icebergs they calve, insufficient number, will eventually contribute to rising sea levels. In the interim, however, there's another problem. The waters surrounding the foot of a glacier are a cornucopia of sea life caused by the upwellings that follow these huge masses of ice dropping into the sea. The phytoplankton and zooplankton at the bottom of the ocean suddenly rises to the surface and triggers the entire food chain. Fish and birds feed on the plankton, birds and sea mammals feed on the fish, polar bears feed on the sea mammals, and humans feed on all of them. It's no coincidence that archaeological signs of human habitation can often be found near the foot of a glacier. As these glaciers recede and are no longer in contact with the water, they stop producing icebergs and the entire ecosystem starts to fall apart. So you can see on this image here, this glacier that used to come down into the valley has receded halfway up the mountain, and will continue to do so as the temperatures get warmer. So now let's look at the effects of climate change on the flora. So first of all, let's take a look at what the tundra normally looks like. Hang on, I'm just going to go back. Let's stop here for a moment. So this is a typical tundra. And you can see here the fall colors that are exactly the same as they are here where we are, except they're all flat on the ground. So there's quite an abundance of plant life that is, however, very, very low. And we see that here as well. All these beautiful colors, all different plants that are populating this particular patch of ground. There are trees in the Arctic. There are birch and there are willows. Those yellow ones there on the image are willows. The sort of reddish orange ones are birch. And they are trees that grow flat on the ground or up the side of rocks where they can be protected from the wind. There you can see a very old um, stem or trunk, if you will, with some bunchberries in front of it. The Arctic, as we have heard, is warming 4 times faster than any place on Earth, and the plant communities, of course, are also responding. One of the catalysts is permafrost, or melting permafrost more specifically. The Arctic is technically a desert, and plants rely more on the upper layer of permafrost melting in summer as a source of water than on precipitation from above. Species diversity is increasing in some areas and decreasing in others. Biotic homogenization, however, meaning that plant communities are becoming more similar to one another, has not yet occurred. Species turnover, i.e., specific areas gaining or losing plant species, is widespread across the Arctic, as it is everywhere. And although species richness is increasing at lower latitudes and warmer sites, it has not changed directionally over time, meaning that plants are not moving to new locations, neither on the north-south nor on the east-west axis. Biodiversity is increasing where areas are getting warmer, permafrost is melting sooner and more abundantly, and human activity is increasing. So these are some birch tree shrubs that are now knee high. They would normally be flat to the ground, maybe 4 inches, 5 inches tall at the most. But this is a valley in Labrador where I found them to be knee high this summer, which I was quite shocked by. Here as well in the foreground, you can see very tall birch trees. They're about waist high. Um, so areas where the erect shrubs and grasses are expanding are experiencing species loss, actually, because the shrubs are no longer being kept in check by cold winds and short growing seasons. These are the factors that cause the trees to lay down in the first place. These taller shrubs, in turn, are shading out smaller tundra plants, mosses, and lichens, which then struggle. While biodiversity may seem like a good thing at first glance, it comes at a significant cost. A change in species composition triggers changes in the food chain, and the animals that depend on food sources such as lichen, berries, and other tundra plants will inevitably be the victims, which in turn will also affect the traditional Inuit way of life. To illustrate this phenomenon, let's take a closer look at the green alder. So for those of you that are foragers, green alders are a lot of fun because the male catkins, when you dry them, can double as pepper. But we don't want them everywhere. They multiply rhizomously and form extremely thick thickets. That didn't sound very good, thick thickets. Um, the green alder is a forerunner species at the tree line. It's one of the first shrubs we encounter before we actually get to the trees. They're also pioneer species due to their ability to fix nitrogen and improve the soil conditions around them. However, with increasing temperatures and melting permafrost, we are encountering vast colonies of green alder a good 200 kilometers north of the tree line, and they are expanding quickly. There have always been green alder in these regions, their seeds transported by birds, but under normal conditions, very few would germinate and thrive. But if you look at these images, you can see where alders have grown into significant thickets and shaded out the tundra plants, thereby allowing grasses to take their place. So here you can only see a very small thicket of alders in the bottom right there, the bright green, but then you see a mountainside very close by where those alders are starting to take over and displace some of the tundra plants. And here again, in the middle of this image, and up to the left as well, all that dark green are alder thickets, and the light green below them are the grasses. So the traditional tundra plants, which at this time of year would tend to be yellow, orange, or red, are not there. Those are grasses that are supplanting them. Having looked at the effects of a warming climate on sea ice, glacier ice, and permafrost, let's finally take a look at how this is impacting the folks that live there, the Inuit. The Inuit, a word that means people, have inhabited the Arctic for over 4,000 years, adapted to the climatic conditions of the north, and perfectly integrated with their environment. But when European explorers and whalers arrived from the 1500s onwards and began what and be, sorry, but then European explorers and whalers arrived from the 1500s onwards and began what was to inexorably change the lives and the way of living of the Inuit. In the 1920s, the Canadian government perceived threats to its declared sovereignty over the Arctic archipelago. Explorers from the US and Norway were active in the region, and Greenlandic hunters were crossing over to Ellesmere Island to hunt muskox, potentially laying the groundwork for a Danish claim. To solidify a presence in the region, RCMP posts were established, supplied by the annual Eastern Arctic Patrol ship. With uncertain ice and weather conditions, the logistics of maintaining the posts proved to be too difficult. So, to be clear, back then it was the opposite. There was too much ice, and often the supply ships couldn't get in at all in a year or even several years in a row to relieve the people that were working there and to bring in supplies and bring out the furs that they were trading and collecting. Instead, the Canadian government began in 1953 and 1955 to relocate Inuit families from Inukjuak in northern Quebec and Mitimatalik on northern Baffin Island to Resolute Bay on Cornwallis Island and Grise Fjord on Ellesmere Island, the northernmost island in the Arctic archipelago, and 2,000 kilometers north of the homelands of these folks, in order to bolster its sovereignty claim to the area. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the Canadian government continued forcing nomadic Inuit into communities under the guise of providing them with housing, education, healthcare, and jobs. Within a couple of generations, a people that was once self-sufficient on the land became wholly dependent on an economic system that they had no means to contribute to. The result today is that Inuit live in modern houses and have access to the same kinds of food that we do. However, this food comes at a steep price, both literally and figuratively, and furthermore has very little to do with their traditional way of feeding themselves. The Inuit still rely very much on hunting for reasons of cost, tradition, and health. Please note your everyday value store. But these traditions are under threat as the warming Arctic wreaks havoc with the traditional foodstuffs. We have already discussed seals in connection with polar bears, but the Inuit also suffer when the ice doesn't form and seal hunting is delayed. This is worth reading. In this region, meaning the Arctic, ringed seal, caribou, and Arctic char are especially valuable to Natiliq heritage and diet. The high protein, quality fat food from these animals is very healthy. People here still go hunting each season, which helps to counter a growing reliance on fast food at the grocery stores. At the core of Inuit hunting traditions is respect for animal spirits, which are powerful and easily offended. Angering them results in a bad hunting season and lack of food. A good hunter always shows respect towards the animal spirit, which is then reborn to be hunted again. Let's stop there for a minute. So the bears themselves, as I was saying, the Inuit also hunt the seals. So when the season is delayed, there's a cost to them. And the bears themselves are part of the Inuit diet. Their skin and fur are still used to make clothing. Bird colonies that traditionally provide eggs are collapsing because their nesting time no longer corresponds with the arrival of their food source. Arctic char catches are dwindling because the coastal waters where Inuit fish with nets are becoming too warm. During the annual run on the rivers, the char are staying further out at sea where the water is colder and out of reach of the nets. More concerning, however, is the rise in temperature in the rivers themselves, where char spawn in the fall and then spend the winter. Arctic char are distressed in water temperatures of 16 degrees. At 20 degrees, their heart starts failing, and at 23 degrees, they can no longer swim. If the rivers continue to warm, this important food source may not only no longer be available to Inuit, but the populations are in danger of collapsing entirely. Caribou migration patterns are also changing. Tuktu, a favorite meat among elders, is becoming scarce as herds adapt their routes to avoid insect swarms, deep snow, and fragile ice. The less Inuit can hunt and eat country food, the more reliant they become on our foodstuffs, and the more they are subject to our lifestyle diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, and so on. The reason that meat is so black is not because it's gone off, but because the oxygen level is so high that it immediately, I'm sorry, the blood is so well oxygenated that it oxidizes immediately when it's hanging on a rafter like that, which makes it unbelievably nutritious. The secondary effect of the diminishing ice is that it's becoming more and more expensive to maintain dog teams, the traditional Inuit way of hunting. If the dogs need to be fed for 10 months a year for only 2 months of hunting on the ice, then the math no longer adds up. Increasingly, Inuit rely on snowmobiles for hunting, and the dog teams are disappearing. I've been traveling to the Canadian Arctic for the past 20 years, as I said. Since most of us will only ever go there once, if at all, it's hard for us to actively track the changes that are taking place. But where once we encountered sea ice on every trip, in fact had to change our route to avoid it if it was too dense, we now have to seek out patches of it to give the guests the experience of slowly sailing through the ice, if indeed we can find any. Glaciers that I remember as being of the tidewater variety have receded up the sides of the mountains. Conversely, some water some tidewater glaciers are moving more quickly, calving more and more icebergs. This has led, for example, to a downward adjustment of the planting zone in eastern Newfoundland because more and more icebergs are floating by the coast and chilling it. Bird cliffs that we always assumed would be populated at certain times of years are no longer a given. We're still seeing lots of polar bears, healthy for the most part, but for how much longer? I once asked the filmmaker Zachariah Kunuk from Igloolik what he thought of global warming, the common term back then. Warmer winters and longer fishing seasons, what's not to like, he said at the time. I wonder what he would say today. Kuyanamik. Thank you.
So Barbara, that is the end of your presentation, is it?
It is indeed.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed that very much. I'm sure everyone else did as well. Keith, would you like to ask some of the questions that were in chat?
Can do. Barbara, did you take all of these photographs?
Yes.
They're stunning. You have a real eye and great talent.
Thank you.
I think we might all be interested in knowing a little bit more about what you do on these trips.
Okay. So I work for a company called Adventure Canada. They were some of the pioneers in Arctic travel, and I started traveling with them in 2005, and eventually they hired me. Um, the original reason was because they needed a German speaking interpreter on board, and I am a German speaking interpreter. But over time, I also became the botany interpreter because plants and plant life is just my passion, and I guess they got wind of that one day. So I go on these trips anywhere between 1 and 3 times during the season. That's my own personal imposed limit, and work on this ship and get an opportunity to travel, as I said, all over the Arctic and down the coast of Labrador, and over to Greenland quite a bit as well. So I'm very very grateful to be able to do this. And to have this glimpse of how things are evolving up there, because I get to go regularly to the same places.
How long do you typically go on a voyage?
Oh, the trips are anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks approximately,
Hmm?
and then as I said, I'll do up to three a year.
Of course, you've illustrated the changes that we hear down in the south that natives are telling us about as the warming effect of climate change are multiplied the farther north you go. So it's 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 worrisome. It's troubling to see the changes in your photographs, and illustrates the drama that people who live there are experiencing. Do you You mentioned a bit about the Inuit hunting, and I was intrigued by your comment about the respect for animals. Could you give us can you tell us how that manifests, how that plays out?
There's a really interesting film by John Huston called Diet of Souls, and it explores this contradiction of a people that live exclusively on animals, on hunting, and yet respect them at the same time. It does sound like a contradiction, but it really isn't, because any hunting people or people that gather from nature understand those ecosystems and are very, very respectful of them, because they know that if they jeopardize them, they will starve. And we in the South tend not to be as aware of where our food comes from, to put it mildly. And and so the Inuit just have a deep understanding of these things. There's one of my favorite Inuit legends, and I will abbreviate it because these legends can go on for hours and hours. But it's the Nuliayuk legend, or Sedna, as some of you may know her. She's the mother of the sea, and and well, okay, I'll do the gory part as well, because that's also part of Inuit culture. She was a young lady who refused to do what her father wished of her, which was to get married. And so one summer he parked her on an island and said, "That's it. You're staying out there with your dogs until you come to your senses." And then in the fall, when he went to get her, he said, "So, are you going to marry this young man?" And she said, "Absolutely not." So he pitched her overboard of the boat, and as she came up and put her hands on the gunnels to come back in, he chopped her fingers off, and they all floated to the bottom of the sea. And she thought, well, no problem, turned around and then hooked her feet on the gunnels, and her father chopped her toes off, and they all floated to the bottom of the sea and became all the sea mammals and all the fish. So she lives down there. She could never get back out into the boat, and is the guardian of all these riches of the sea. But when we humans misbehave, she entangles all of those animals in her hair. And then a shaman has to go down and, on behalf of humankind, beg for forgiveness and promise that we will better our ways. And if she believes him, he can then comb out her hair and release all the animals again, so that hunting is once again successful. So that's just one example of these stories that are told in Inuit culture, that remind people to be respectful of the environment that they live in, all the while taking what they need to survive themselves.
Great story, and also to pay attention to what your father tells you, right?
Or not. You can look up the St. Barbara legend. It's not a pretty one either.
The Our daughter lived in Yukon for a bit, and she said there were two seasons: winter and mosquitoes. Has that been your experience up north?
It's funny you ask that because it was my experience this summer for the first time. Usually going later in the season, and going to the Eastern Arctic, which is rockier than the Western Arctic. The Western Arctic has a lot more bog and marsh and wetlands, so the mosquitoes are worse over there. In the rocky part, I have never had an issue until this year when suddenly we were absolutely swarmed in Greenland to the point of literally not being able to see in front of you. Now they don't bite, or in this particular instance, they didn't bite, but they were just so annoying. So yes, there is an increase that I can personally see of the bugs up there. Um, and people, when I do the plant interpretation, people often ask, well, how do plants get pollinated? I don't see any bees. Well, part of it is that we go there so late in the season that the bees are gone. There are actually bees, but also that all those other insects, and that's true here as well. The mosquitoes and the black flies are excellent pollinators. So every creature has its place.
Indeed. Sue wanted to know if there are any parasites in the raw meat of the Inuit country food.
That's a good question. I don't know. I would imagine that bear could potentially have parasites. I know that the liver of polar bear is very, very high in vitamin A. It's enough to kill you. So that's one liver that is not eaten ever. Um, the fish, I would suspect not, because in the colder waters they don't get the parasites. But I'm just guessing at all of this. I don't know. Um, but I want to say no, because the traditional Inuit diet is raw. And if there were a lot of danger associated with it, many of them would be gone by now.
Good point. And you, as you pointed out, you're a botanist, not a zoologist. So
Yes,
great
correct.
answer. I won't paraphrase Les Weir's question. He wanted to know, with the expansion of green alder and birch, are there any smaller mammals that might migrate north who could become prey for polar bears?
Mammals as in land-bound mammals?
Yeah, land mammals that might take shelter in this ground cover.
And become prey for polar bears?
Right.
Huh.
Can
I
I
don't
qualify
know.
that?
I've never, well, because polar bears, they don't eat meat, they only eat fat. So when they catch a seal, they only eat the blubber,
Yeah.
which is why the foxes trail them religiously, because they know that once the polar bear's done, then all the meat will be left over for them. So I don't imagine that there would be a mammal per se that the polar bears would be interested in hunting, on the assumption that they even could.
That was a great question, and your answer is even better. Thank you. Um, Pat wondered about the Inuits' feeling about tourism.
Hmm. That's a very good question. Um, I think it's pretty much the same as anywhere in the world, in that tourism is certainly welcome, or let's be clear, tourism dollars are certainly welcome. Tourism itself is also welcome, because as a very isolated community, the children especially, when I first started traveling up there, they some of them had never seen a halunat, a white person. Um, and me in particular, they tend to pull my hair because they don't think it's real. And it's um, but over time, because it's become a more and more popular thing to do, there are communities that are starting to fight back and to limit tourism, to control tourism, and to channel tourism, um, which sometimes doesn't feel very good. It feels a little bit like, yeah, we want your dollars, but don't bug us. it's a tough one. It's a tough one because it's still an industry that can certainly bring dollars to the Arctic that are sorely needed. Um, but it needs to be managed like tourism anywhere. I mean, we've been reading a lot over this last year about over tourism and the measures that communities are going to, including getting water pistols and squirting tourists in Barcelona. It's so the Inuit are starting to understand that they need to manage their tourism for it to be successful. But by and large, they are such a friendly, welcoming, open people, and such a delight to chat with that for now tourism is proving to be relatively successful, I would say.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jerry, if you've got a question.
The military are practicing their jets up in the north. Apparently, I heard. Could you tell me about that?
I'm sorry, that was a wonky connection. You're asking about the military jets in the north and if they're there.
If they're flying, if they're disturbing the people there because they
If they're
practice.
disturbing the people there, I don't know. I know that they do fly up there. I've never seen or heard them personally, and it's never been a subject that came up. So I don't know. I do know, however, that the rangers up there are all Inuit, and that they're very interested in protecting Canada and protecting Canada's sovereignty in the north. So I don't know if the jets are bothersome. Um, one way or the other. But a military presence in the north is accepted by all, including the Inuit.
I think that's the end of the questions in the chat, Susan.
I actually have one more. And I wondered, Barbara, did you see any evidence of oil exploration or drilling in your travels?
No, no, the oil exploration is further west. Um, and in the eastern Arctic, it's mostly mining, and obviously it's not somewhere that the tourist ships go to. The mining industries are actually, a friend of mine used to run one of the big mines up there, and he's the person, I'm not gonna use the right terms, but he's the person who basically invented the policy around including local communities in development and resource extraction. Because the mining companies, when they first started, as we know, just went marching in there and said, "Move aside, we've got to get in the ground here." So these policies were developed so that the Inuit would be on board, and the tougher ones to convince were the corporations. But that's all working smoothly now. It's again, it's the same balancing act as with tourism. It's the economics of the north need to be developed. We can't send the people back on the land and say, "Oops, sorry for bothering you, off you go." We need an economic structure up there, but what that looks like needs to be worked out in conjunction with the people whose livelihood is directly affected, not just whose bottom line is affected. What I do know is that in Western Greenland, they're starting explorations as well. So there is some both for minerals and for oil. So yes, there are certainly explorations going on, but it's not something that we would actually see. So as I said earlier, the Nunavut is the size of Western Europe with a population of 38,000. So we're not going to see anybody who's up there doing explorations.
So, Jerry, I'm enjoying your background, the Northern
The
Lights,
Northern Lights, yes, thank you.
virtual background. And Barbara, I'm wondering if you saw any Northern Lights while you were up there.
Well, the Inuit believe that the Northern Lights are the spirits of the ancestors, and at the moment we're having quite significant solar activity and solar flares. So basically, they're there all the time. But when we go there in the summertime, of course, it's daylight almost 24 hours, or even more than 24 hours. So no, we don't get to see them. We often see them on our last trips of the season down the Labrador coast when we actually get a few hours of nighttime. And we always ask the guests if they would like to be woken up should the northern lights appear. And we always get a resounding yes. So we then very quietly on the intercom say, anyone who's awake, the northern lights are out. And then we all dash out on the deck in our PJs.
That sounds great. Barb, would you mind stop sharing your screen?
Sure.
And I want to thank you very much for your very interesting presentation and all the beautiful photographs. And I'm so glad that you and I bumped into each other. And
Likewise, thank you so much. And thank all of you for your interest and for being here this evening.
yeah,
How do we get a job on this ship? Ah,
so does anybody else have any other questions before I draw the meeting to a close? Nope.
Good.
Okay. Well, this is the last Enviro Cafe of the 2025 season. And in January, we have Baz Conlon of Haliburton Micromeadows speaking. I believe he will speak the second Tuesday in January. And he's going to talk about invasive plants and other invasive species. So he's a terrific speaker. We had him speak earlier this year on native plants, and I'm sure you would enjoy hearing him speak. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and I wish you happy holidays, and hope to see you again in January. Thanks, everybody. And thanks again, Barbara. That was terrific.
thank you. Kuya Lemik.